Hi guys, welcome to the third part of the tutorial series on Webdynpro for ABAP. In this tutorial, I'm going to discuss context. What is context, and what are the different controllers that are available in ABAP Webdynpro. Okay, when you create a component in SCIT for the first time, some of the things gets generated automatically by the system, like component controller, interface controller, in the view, in the window, extra, etc. So now let's understand each one of them. Component controller. Now it has properties tab, context tab, attributes, events, and methods. So what is context? Context is basically the data storage part of the component. If you compare it to the normal ABAP programs, we define variables in ABAP program, and there are different kinds of variables. There are normal, simple variables which refers to a data element, and there are variables which refers to a structure, and there are variables which are internal tables, right? So here I can create nodes and attributes, right? Attribute can be compared to a simple variable that we define in ABAP programs, which refers to a single data element, right? Node can be referred to a structure or an internal table in the ABAP programs. So internal tables, they can have multiple columns, right? So similarly, node can have multiple attributes inside it. I've created a node with the name node. Let's see what are the properties that a node has. If you see here, a dictionary structure. So I've used dictionary structure USH02, and you can select what are the columns that you want to have under this node. For example, the USH02 table has several columns, 18 columns. Now I haven't selected all of them. I've selected only certain columns, right? So and then the other important property of the node is cardinality. So this node can represent a structure or an internal table. So now internal table can hold multiple records, the structure can hold only single records. So the cardinality refers to how many records that particular node can hold. So the 0 on the left side refers to the minimum number of records that you can hold, and the number on the right side refers to the maximum number of records that a node can hold. So if I say 0 to n, which means it can hold a minimum of 0 records and the maximum of n records. If I say 1 to 1, which means it's a mandatory node, so you have to fill at least one record inside it. Okay, and then something called supply function. We'll talk about it in the next tutorial probably, but just to give an idea what it is basically it's a method. When you create a supply function, okay, so it creates a method in the methods tab, and you can write some custom logic to fill in that particular node when you call the application for the first time. And so that is what the context and the nodes. I'll come to this interface node a little bit later in the video. Let's go to the attributes. Now these are the two attributes that come by default. Now WD context, it basically refers to the context here. Okay, so if you want to access the values, the data records that are stored inside the node, you can use this particular attribute, and this refers to an interface called if WD context node. So this interface will have a lot of methods to basically access the values of the nodes, or you can fill in the node with some data records, right? So if you go to the interface, a lot of methods. Most important methods that we use in normal programming is something called get child node, which is used to read the nodes under the main context node. and also the get attributes. If you want to read single attributes, you can use get attributes method, and you have a bind element or the bind table, which is used to fill in the nodes with the values, right? So that is the wd underscore context attribute. And we have wd underscore this refers to the, this is basically a self reference to the controller interface. So if I have, let's say, I've created some custom methods inside this component controller, and I want to access them. I want to access them in for example, this method inside the wd init method. You can use wd underscore this attribute and refer to that method. Okay, and also we have methods tab. So there's 5 methods that you see that will start with wd do, or created by the system when we create the component for the first time. And then so these are called hook methods. Okay, so the sequence of the methods, so the sequence of this method calls, the sequence of these method calls is predefined by Webdynpro runtime. We cannot change that. For instance, the init method gets called at the beginning when we execute the application, and the exit method is called when we exit the application. So the sequence cannot be changed. So these are called hook methods. And then coming to the, so component controller is a central location for data exchange between different views, which means I can have multiple views inside a component, and I want to access a certain node in different views. So if you can define, for example, this node value, I want access in view 1, and I want to access in view 2 as well. So in that case, if you define the node inside the component controller, you can access that. Node values inside both the views. So this is basically a global place where you have to define your nodes and methods, which can be accessed across all the views in your component. Okay, so that is the component controller. And then we have component interface. So the component interface has 2 things. One is interface controller and one is interface views. Okay, let's talk about interface views first. If you create an application for a component, so this application refers to this component, and it refers to this interface view, right? So this is the interface view. So every window that you create will have an interface view, and if you go to the interface view, there's something called inbound plug. Okay, I'll talk about these plugs in the next tutorial, but just to give an idea of what it is, inbound plugs are basically the starting points of the window or the view. Outbound plugs are the exit points of the window or view. So by default, we have a plug called default, which is created by the system, and it has been set as a startup plug. Right. So I can have multiple inbound plugs defined here, but the plug which was defined as a startup plug gets called by the system when we execute the application. Right. So now the application know which component to call, and inside the component which interface view to call, and which plug to trigger. Okay, so this interface view is directly linked to this window. If you go to the window, I have embedded view 1 and view 2 inside the window. Now how will the system know which view to call? So there is a property called default. If you check this property, system knows that when it calls this window, it has to call the view 1 first, and view 1 will have the layout, and the layout will have UI elements that ultimately gets displayed on the screen. So this is how the actual call stack of the Webdynpro application, how the view is finally gets called. So this is basically the visual part of the application, right? I mean, the view is what the user sees on the web browser. Now there is another part of the component interface that is not a visual part of the application, because it doesn't have a layout tab here. So what it is basically a programmable part of the application, the component. Now, as I mentioned as I mentioned in the first tutorial of the series, one of the main features of ABAP Webdynpro is component reuse. I can reuse this component example underscore 02 inside some other component, right? So the component interface enables communication between different Webdynpro components. Now, component interface contains two parts: interface controller and interface view that I just explained. Interface view represents the visual part of the component interface. Interface controller represents the programmable part of the component interface. As you can see, it has context, events, and methods. So if you want to expose any of the context, events, or the methods to some other component, those things should exist inside the interface controller. Now, now how do we get the context or the events or the methods inside the interface controller? If you go to the component controller, I've created a node called inode. Now you can see there's a funny icon here after the folder icon, after the node icon basically. And in the properties of the node, there's something called interface node, right? If you check this checkbox, which means system understands this particular node is part of the interface controller as well. So as soon as you check this checkbox, that particular context node appears under the interface controller context. In the same way, if you create any method inside the component controller and check the interface checkbox here, for example the int method here, it appears automatically in the interface controller, right? And similarly, you can do that with the events. Okay, so that is what interface controller is. So which to summarize thing, what interface controller does is basically it extends the visibility of the context, events, and methods of the component beyond the limitations of the component. The other thing that I wanted to mention here is if you have multiple views, for example in this case we have two views. Now I want to make view 2 as a default, right now the view 1 is the default, right? So when you execute the application, what you see here is this. You see, this is the text element I've created for in the view 1. Sorry, right? So this is the text element I've created in the view 1, which says this is first view. Now I want to make the view 2 as a default one, so that when you start the application, you will see the UI elements that are present in view 2. Now to do that, you just need to right click on the particular view, go to the change mode, right click on the view 2 and say set as default. Okay, now the view 2 is the default view, so we'll just activate it. And the way I've created view 2 is it just has one text view element which says this is the second view, right? So let's just refresh the browser and see what happens. Okay, you see, this is the second view. So the second view is the default view now. So you can set any view as a default view. I think that's all I wanted to cover in this tutorial. So thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you.